Hello again, my friends, and welcome back to the channel. I'm currently kicking back on my bed with my head on the pillow, which makes for a rather relaxing video, I suppose. My original intention today was to talk about something different, but as I sat down, I looked over and I saw this DVD. Where did it go? Here it is. It was an Erowid.org DVD from 2010. It's an Erowid archive. And it really took me back, I guess, almost 15 years now. Erowid is a website that shares information of people's experiences with various drugs and substances and has an extremely in-depth, a treasure trove of people's personal experiences on various substances, as well as timelines and trip experiences and trip reports and dosages taken, things like that. So it's a place where originally back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, whenever it started, I started using it around, I think, 98. And when I discovered it, I realized there was a place where people were posting information on taking psychedelics. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting because I've had a lot of experiences and I've had a lot of discussions with people in the past about them, but not so much in-depth detail as many people are willing to, put on the internet and say, this is what I went through, whether good or bad. And it ended up being one of the most useful websites that has ever been in existence, which a lot of people don't even know exists. And I wanted to talk about that for a minute and just give them the props they deserve for still being around to this day, still being able to click on Erowid to learn more information about some substances you may be consuming. Because drugs have always had a stigma, but they're really starting to lose that stigma now that people realize that most of America has been medicated for a long time. You see, the trip reports on there aren't just from psychedelics or heavy street drugs. These are trip reports from pharmaceuticals, or adverse reactions or experiences to various antidepressants, anxiolytics, or antipsychotics, things like that, where people took too much or the wrong kind for them, and they will give you a detailed report of what happened to them. And that is very helpful because the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have anything like that. You would think with all the drugs these various companies manufacture every year that they would at least have some sort of a website where people could go. And they do. They have the VAERS reporting system where you can, if you have an issue with it, but it's very lacking, let's just say. But that's another topic. I got that DVD when I made a donation. It came along with a t-shirt. I think it was like a $50 donation to Erowid back in 2010. And a few years later, I made another one. And it's funny because I thought about this as one of the very few online, websites that I've actually donated to like that. I mean, shit, I still haven't even given to Wikipedia. I don't use it very often, but yeah, I should throw them a $5 or something. It's just what we do. We have to support each other. And so I'm like, well, Erowid has been so useful to me. There's no way I can't donate. It's like, and this was during the time when the internet was relatively young, where not every household had a computer yet. And it still lives to this day, and it's still just as useful. And they have disclaimers if people put something dangerous up or a very high dose. The people who read and the moderators will put a disclaimer in there of this is an unusually high dose of something. And I gotta say, I lived through the 80s Just Say No campaign from Nancy Reagan. It didn't work. It just made people more interested. In fact, when I was in middle school, they sent me to a class about drugs with all these other kids that were using drugs. I'd never touched anything in my life. But guess what? I was introduced to all these facts and figures, as well as all the people who had all the shit. And the rest is history. But drugs are an important part of our culture. I think it's finally the stigma is falling away, and people are able to say, yes, I like to use substances, whether it's daily or recreationally. And it's all about moderating your intake and knowing what works for you. You see, and this is the majorly overlooked factor. People say this drug does this and this drug does that. No, that drug does that to you, and it might not to someone else. And the thing people don't realize about most drugs is that the first time you take a drug, you're going to have a completely different experience than the 10th time you take that drug. This has proven itself to be true over and over again in my experience, and everyone I've talked to say, oh, yeah, it changes. It's different. Your brain becomes accustomed to it, or there are many different reasons why this happens, but yes, your brain learns the chemical a little better and therefore processes it differently. Many psychedelics are like this. Some which, if you take too many times, the magic is kind of gone because your brain has acclimated to it to an extent. And you will always get effects from it, but it's never quite the same. And this is why when people say, oh, I tried that once and it wasn't for me, well, sometimes you have to try it a few times. Sometimes an uncomfortable situation is what you're going to encounter because you didn't know what to expect and you were caught off guard. And this is why the trip reports are so useful to people, being able to hear people's experiences with their own, awkwardness or being unsure about whether they want to do this or not, because psychedelics are a dedicated thing. And I'm going to make a series coming up about various, psychoactive substances. It's one of my topics of interest and always has been, but I don't talk about it on YouTube anymore because YouTube just censors or deletes all of my videos in the past. Like I had, you got to imagine that I think I have like 4,500 videos uploaded, and I can't go through them all and try to remove the ones that talk about drugs. But back in the day, it wasn't a big deal, and I could show my pot plants, things like that, because I used to grow. And these days, it's just like I don't even talk about these things, and it's unfortunate because right now, this time in history, we need more than ever to be able to talk about drugs openly. And hey, I have got young kids. I mean, I have to be able to talk to them openly and freely about this. I don't want to celebrate the use of drugs because many of them are very dangerous. One of my childhood friends died last month from an overdose. We just found out. He'd been sitting in his apartment. I mean, dead for apparently weeks, and nobody knew. And this is what addiction does. And of course, we're talking about fentanyl or one of the other, there's even a new compound which was created in the 50s, but now they're producing it. It's 50 times stronger than fentanyl. It's a totally different world than I grew up in. So while I could use Erowid in 98 and learn about things and various powders and substances, today I wouldn't put anything in my body unless I had a test kit or I really, really trusted the person who I was getting it from. Even then, I've personally seen situations where one bag tests for what it's supposed to be, and the next bag looks identical days later, and it's something totally different. And this is often seen in MDMA and cathinones, or synthetic cathinones, which are a replacement for MDMA, but they're not the same thing. Fortunately, a lot of the psychedelic compounds aren't often adulterated, but if you go out and buy LSD today, it could be any one of hundreds of analogs of LSD or something very similar. Many people today have never really had the real thing. Back in the 90s, it had a huge resurgence, and this was before a huge bust in the late 90s, I think around 2000, but we used to be able to go to Portland, and it was everywhere. You'd touch your tongue and look at people, and they'd nod, and you'd walk over, and how many do you want? 3 for 10. And we were young and dumb, and fortunately, I didn't make the mistake of getting into heavy substances, and I made a promise to myself, I'm not going to stick a needle in my arm. No needles. And that was it. And I've stuck to that. No pun intended. I stuck to it. I've stuck to that for all these years. And I'm also very cautious and very aware of what I'm consuming if I ever take anything. as much as I've talked about mushrooms, for example, I've seen them come and go. I've had friends growing them and helped them harvest. Over the last 3 years, I haven't taken them in like 3.5 years. Like, I think once, but it was a small amount. But it's a ceremony. That's what I'm getting at. These are different substances. Psychedelics are ceremonial drugs. They're not meant to be taken just to go out and party. The only time that I will do anything like that is when I'm going out to a concert or something, going to see Fish or the Dead, and I'm hanging out with my friends and my fam, and we want to bond. And the whole intention is to get closer to the people. So it's about going to the event, then coming back to the campsite and having long conversations until the sun comes up. And it honestly, to me, it touches my heart. It's one of the most beautiful experiences I've had in my life, several times, over and over, of everything I've experienced. Those early, more wee morning hour conversations with people around a campfire or just a campsite with some Christmas lights, whatever it might be, those are bonding times which I wouldn't trade for anything. Just amazing experiences. So much love, so much connection. You feel one with people, you feel one with the earth, and you think, how could people not want this feeling, right? And I've traced all of these ritual uses of these substances back to ancient times, and pretty much from what I've gathered historically, because history is written by many different people, but not everything makes it into the history books. And let's just say that most, if not all, religious and spiritual cultures in general, ingested substances to alter their consciousness, whether it be dissociatives or dissociative mushrooms, for example, like Amanita muscaria, or it be something like psilocybe cubensis, what people consider the standard shroom. And there are also Paniolus and various other genus. Here on the coast, we have the ones that were called flying saucers. They're actually some of the strongest in the world. They're considered the azurescens. They grow down by Fort Stevens here. And, nature provides and we consume. And even LSD is derived from ergot, a fungus, which has a long history of messing up people in villages. So let's just say that we have a long history with chosen and not chosen, consumption of these substances, and we were unaware. But today, we're aware. We can see these molecules. We know what they look like. We know which receptor sites they attach to some extent. For example, we have the NMDA receptor, which has affected things like ketamine. Then we have the 5-HT2A receptors, which LSD has an affinity for, and psilocybin. And then we have DMT, which is not just a compound that affects your brain, but it's endogenous. It's produced by the brain and the body. And during times of intensity like childbirth or death, it's a wild ride. Our bodies are drug bags. Even morphine, there's a reason why we call what we have in our body endorphins. They're endorphins. It's endogenous morphine. It's your body's own morphine. The reason why drugs affect you is because they're similar to things our body produces naturally. Cannabinoids, cannabis. That's how we discovered that we have a chemical just like it. We have an endocannabinoid system in the body and brain. And they named the molecule that our brain produces anandamide. Anandamide is a Sanskrit word for bliss. So they knew what they were talking about. It's always been behind the scenes, a little out of sight, and people are still scared to talk about getting high. And it's usually and mostly because we don't want the kids to be idiots. So kids, don't be idiots. Wait till you're older. Wait till you have a guide, somebody who can help you to understand these things. And please, for the love of God, don't go out and do any powders at parties. I got to repeat this. If you're young and you go out and party with people and somebody offers you a line of something, just don't do it. You'll be way better off. Even if you've seen several other people do it. I mean, unless you know exactly what you're doing, Powders these days can contain the smallest amount of fent, and it'll kill you quicker than shit. Happens all the time. It's not. It's worth being scared, and it's worth testing your products. And I know folks might say, well, there's some of you out there who may be totally opposed to illegal drugs because they're illegal, and say, well, the pharmaceutical drugs are okay because they're prescribed. I would just say, on that note, many of the prescribed drugs end up being recalled. Many of them cause death. Many of them have a very biased research which favors them. They will throw out any bad tests. Very few double-blind, placebo-controlled studies with, that they can draw from, and they'll pick the one that they like. And we've seen, recalls on things like Vioxx, which had to kill a lot of people before they pulled it off the shelf. And they knew from the beginning it was dangerous. You're not safe just because it's in a bottle with a label. I just want to make that clear. Many of these drugs, these are what I call the long drugs. Anytime a doctor would tell me this is going to take 3 weeks to start working, I have no interest in it. I want something that works quickly. I want something that affects my body. In 3 weeks, my brain can change how it thinks already. It's almost like you're just hoping that you pull out of your funk, and maybe the pills are working, but maybe they're fucking you up long term because you're taking SSRIs that we don't even understand how they work. So for some people, they work phenomenally, but what is the side effect? What are the long-term costs of taking something every day? And when I mean long drugs, I don't mean something you take for a long time. I mean substances that you take that affect you all day, like taking a Valium, for example, lasts many hours, or say taking morphine compared to, say, taking kratom, which is shorter in duration. But it's not as... I don't want my brain to be constantly, every moment of the day, affected by a drug and me not know who I am. Because there is something called depersonality, and their depersonalization. People start to lose their emotions by taking some of these SSRIs too long. And if you quit taking Valium cold turkey, you could die. It's crazy. So be aware that what we call heavy drugs, the psychedelics, some people think are extremely heavy drugs. They are some of the most wonderful substances you will ever encounter in your life. They will bring you closer to yourself and to others if they're done properly. And I still believe psychedelics can save the world, but I'm a little older and wiser now and realize that they're not for everyone, and I've always known that. The Timothy Leary, Johnny Appleseed thing of just everybody take acid is bullshit. It's not for everyone, especially those who are prone to schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, manic episodes, or psychosis. So we've got to watch out. We've got to know what we're taking, and we've got to be careful, and we've got to look out for each other. And that's why I would recommend Erowid to anybody who's curious. Do a little digging before you take something and make sure that you educate yourself. And with that, I think I've rambled on enough about drugs. I don't want to sound like I'm giving them the thumbs up here, because it's right here, man, in the middle. You've got to weigh the options yourself, and you've got to be intelligent enough. But I think being a stickler against changing your consciousness and saying, no, sobriety is the way, if that's your thing, that's great. But please don't chastise those who choose to partake. The enlightened moments that I've had under the spell of a long psychedelic journey are so profound that they are the religious experiences of my life. And now science has shown that the same areas of the brain light up, whether you're meditating, in deep prayer, or taking psychedelics. There's no question that we are opening up parts of our brain and shutting down parts of our brain that we don't want to use. Our thinking faculties, or at least not thinking, it's complicated. The thing that allows us to do paperwork, the thing that allows us to focus on somebody else's discussion. It's more like you're in your own reality and you're in there rewiring your own brain. And it's an amazing, amazing moment, an amazing experience that for most people who have taken them, on these clinical trials, mushrooms, for example, said that it was Most of them said that it was one of the most important moments, if not the most important moment of their entire life. And so be aware of that. But it's not the drug that does it. I just want to make this clear. It's not the drug that changes you. It's you. It's the ideas that you feed yourself. So make sure that you realize that if that's true about programming yourself on psychedelics, that's also going to be true about programming yourself in day-to-day life. If you wake up every day and think the world sucks, if you wake up every day and complain, if you're one of those people that puts on a plastic smile but really is always miserable, you got to pull yourself out of it. There's no way out. There's no way around it. You won't be happy and content until you just let shit go. And I believe some substances can help us really let shit go, as long as we don't let it all go, because we still got to be responsible humans. We all know it in our hearts. You got to work. You got to bring home the bacon. You got to feel productive. You got to feel wanted. You've got to contribute to your community and your family or friends. And you also want to have a purpose in life. So find one that works for you. Peace and love, everybody. Talk to you next time. Check out my... I do have another channel. I haven't used it in quite a while. Carpo's Thoughts. I was thinking about uploading some of my other shit on there, but I also have a Patreon for anybody who wants to donate, and I also have a 15-minute free thinking podcast, and all the links and shit are in the normal places. So peace and love. Be well.